But I'll be online.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Neil.
Sorry about that.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, fine.
Right, minutes of the last meeting. Is everyone happy with the minutes of the last meeting? Are there any amendments that we want to make? No? So happy with the minutes of the last meeting. There is no urgent business that's been brought forward. So no urgent business to discuss. There won't be any necessity to divide the agenda. So I can't see that happening. Declarations of interest. Members are invited to declare any personal or disclosable pecuniary interest they may have, including the nature and extent of such interests, in any items to be considered at this meeting. Are there any declarations of interests? No? None? So we'll move on to item number 5, which is Grant Thornton's Southampton District Council Annual Audit Plan. Now, unfortunately, Grant Thornton can't be with us today. They're not here. So we've been given the annual audit plan, and if there are any questions that members have for Grant Thornton, we'll record the questions, and we can ask Grant Thornton to respond to those questions. Now, I put forward a couple of questions previously on the plan. Have we had an answer from those yet?
Not yet, Chairman, but we will certainly circulate the response to those to all members of the
Yeah, so I'll just recap on what the questions I put forward to Grant Thornton are. When it comes to their costs, we're looking at an increase of 27%, which is £9,000. So they've increased their charges to us by £9,000. Now the justification for that is that they are earning value for money, and they're also checking the ISA as well whilst they're doing the audit. And then the question that I put forward to them is, can they please confirm that the additional hours that they are doing in order to cover those two areas? So what I wanted to confirm is that for a 27% increase in fees, we will be getting 27% increase in hours as far as Grant Thornton is concerned. So I've asked Grant Thornton to confirm, and I'd like them to do this on a kind of open book basis, how they can justify the 27% increase in fees based on the number of hours that they've done. And as of yet, we don't have an answer to that, but they will be coming to our meeting on, I believe, the 30th of September. And that's going to be part of what we discuss when we have the actual audit presented to us on the 30th of September. I think that was the only question I had, wasn't it?
Yes, Chairman, there was a question about what were the audit fees for the previous year, 1920 financial statement. The base fee was actually £33,000, and the final fee that we were charged was £47,000. So there was an increase of £14,000, which is 42%. The majority of that related to additional work which the auditor said they had to carry out in relation to fixed asset and pensions. These are national issues that all auditors were required by the Financial Accounting Board to do more work around fixed assets and pensions. We did respond to the Redmond review that looked at audit arrangements for the future, and part of our national response on that was that we felt the amount of work which is done on fixed assets and pensions for local authorities where it doesn't have an impact on your bottom line, it doesn't impact on the income and expenditure account, because any changes in pension liability or fixed asset valuations are reversed out before the impact on your bottom line. So it's not like private sector, in the private sector where that can have an impact on your profit and loss. And therefore I think councils up and down the country were disappointed that the Redmond review didn't say that they could scale back the amount of work that they did around fixed assets and pensions. So they still have to do the same amount of work for us as they would for a private limited company. And that was In the main, a large part of the additional fee, it will be exactly the same again this year. They are already doing a lot of work around pensions and fixed assets. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Do members have any questions that they want us to put to the auditors? Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Is this going to be, this actual rise, is that going to be the same as it was before when they can actually drift on with the price? Because we looked at, I think, 30-odd thousand and ended up with 48,000. Is that going to be the same as this one? Because that's always a concern of mine, that we're going to they're going to come back at the end of the year and say, well, this is that, and we've got to add another 10,000 or 15,000 or whatever the case might be. Can we actually secure that actual estimate?
Thank you, Chairman. So on page 20 of the audit agenda, they have set out their proposed fee for 2021, and they have said that that is based on good quality working papers from the team, which is something they've always had in the past. So they have set their proposed fee at £54,271. Now, that is the fee we are expecting to be charged. We do not expect any variations from the audit plan which they have presented to the committee today. But I think probably if Grant Thornton were here today, I think they would say that that is dependent on how the audit goes and you know what they find during the audit. They, as members know, in the past we've had very clean audit reports. They've always complemented our working papers, so we are not expecting any increase on that proposed fee.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean, you and your team do a wonderful job, and you do all the work for them. So they're actually just looking at the figures you produce, basically. So why should they want all this extra money? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Any other questions, Mark?
No, mine's not a question. I would just bear out absolutely what my colleague, Councillor Taylor said. Okay.
Do we have any other questions or comments from members of the audit committee? No? The leader of the council?
Thank you, Chairman. I do think this is a totally unsatisfactory situation, and I know that all councils around the country are caught in it. We were promised a system that was going to make audit more affordable for councils. Instead of which, we seem to have got a system that's less affordable for councils. I think another question worth asking would be, given the increase in the charge that they're going to make to us, I would expect somebody from Grant Thornton to be able to turn up to our meetings, even if they're dialing remotely. And I think we should look into whether we can accommodate them on Teams or Zoom or something on the screen, at least for this item of the agenda.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I have been in dialogue with Grant Thornton, and certainly that is the intention for future meetings, and that they will dial in remotely. There are two extra things I just wanted to add on audit fees. There is a national consultation at the moment about the appointment for local auditors that will come into effect from April 2023. So as members of the Audit Committee will be aware, we are in a 5-year arrangement currently with Grant Thornton, because we entered into the PSAA contract framework, as did 97% of all councils up and down the country. So we will definitely have Grant Thornton for 21-22 and the 22-23 accounts. From April 2023, we will be able to either go into what will be a national contract framework arrangement again, or we will be able to do something locally. And that's something we will have to consider going forward. The risk with doing something locally is you won't have those economies of scale if you went into a national framework, and you could find yourselves in a position of having even higher audit fees than we have now. But the benefit of local arrangements would be that you're doing that procurement yourselves, and you would be able to choose your external auditor from the market. There is a very limited market because it's quite a specialised area in terms of local government auditing. Also, nationally, the government have recognised that audit fees are going up, so they have put 15 million in for 21-22 nationally, and we will get a share of that. That's to compensate us for extra audit fees, and our share will be anywhere between 20,000 and 25,000. And I think what we're doing nationally is lobbying with people like the District Councils Network to have that 15 million built in permanently into the local government settlement, so that we would get that extra 25,000 on an annual basis. At the moment, it is only a one-off for this year for the 21-22 audit. Thank you, Chairman.
And Grant Thornton have also committed to attend the meeting when they present the audit, the final audit as well, haven't
Yes, certainly, Chairman. Yes, thank you.
they? Okay, any other comments, questions from members? Yes, Councillor Pennington.
Chairman, page 10, the council reviews its land and buildings 5 yearly as investment on the... It shouldn't it, because of COVID, probably, as a result of COVID, the land and buildings are now changing much differently to what they did before. Wouldn't it be wiser to do that at shorter intervals?
I think possibly what we can do is put that question to Grant Thornton.
Yes, I'm happy to answer that
Oh,
question.
you can
Chairman.
answer it as well, yeah?
This is set out in the National Accounting Standards. So nationally, councils have to have a 5-year rolling programme. That is something that we adopt, as do councils up and down the country. What we do have to do is we have to supplement that with annual fair value assessments of anything which is classed as an investment property. So members will be aware we've got 2 investment properties. We've got the one at Ivy Bridge and we've got one at Dartmouth. Those have an annual evaluation, and we have got those valued this year. There is no significant change from the previous year's valuation, and we will be bringing a report to members at the September Audit Committee on those 2 investment properties. But you will be able to see that actually the change is only actually £10,000, which is hardly anything in relation to the value of those investment properties. There will be, as there was last year, a material inherent uncertainty around evaluation, and that's to do with COVID and to do with the pandemic. So that rider, which was on last year's accounts about the evaluation of investment properties and fixed assets, that will still be there in this year's accounts. That is a national thing, it's not something specific to Southampton's fixed assets or investment properties. That's something which has come out nationally from the Institute of Chartered Surveyors. So yes, we do look at all of our material fixed assets, and if we feel those need valuation more frequently, such as the investment properties, those are done on an annual basis.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
Any other questions from members of the council? No? Okay. So the audit committee knows the plan from Grant Thornton, and look forward to seeing them when they execute it and come to the audit committee next time around to report on it. Item number 6, the internal audit annual report. Couple of points on that I'd like to make to start off with. We also have a recommendation that we're looking at making as well. One of the main points comes from page 35, where you can see that 11 out of the 47 audit checks have yet to be performed effectively. What's happened here is that the internal audit, the people who work, the team that works on the internal audit, have been utilised to pay out grants. And as a consequence, they haven't been able to maintain the same volume of audits as they have done in the past. And therefore, there has been a slight outstanding of some of the internal audit checks. And there is a recommendation that will come before the audit committee. And how do we share that recommendation?
At the appropriate time, if I read it out.
Yes.
Shares that.
So, are there any questions from members regarding the internal audit annual report? Questions from members of the Audit Committee? No? Any questions from any other members? Or comments? Yes, Leader of Council.
Chairman, I was going to introduce the report, but you've done it for me. So,
If you'd like to.
do you want me to do it or not?
Yes, please.
Okay, thanks. So, as part of the internal audit reporting process, the Audit Committee has been receiving updates on the progress made on last year's audit plan. Under the public sector internal audit standards, the head of internal audit is required to present an annual report that provides an opinion that can be used by the Council to inform its annual governance statement. Today's report is that annual report which summarises the work carried out by the internal audit during 2021, reviews the performance of the internal audit service and provides an audit opinion on the adequacy of the internal control. Overall, and based on the work performed during 2020 to 21, internal audit is able to provide reasonable assurance on the adequacy and effectiveness of the authority's internal control environment. Now, you've heard from the Chairman further details, and there are further down the report details of what has been done and some of the opinions given. Thank you, Chairman.
Any questions from members on the internal audit report? Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, not really a question, but this is my first time on this committee now. In this session, I've been on audit for quite a few years, and when I read through the pages, I thought, oh dear, on the face of it, it doesn't look like we're doing very well. But as you explained, many members of staff have been involved in sorting out COVID problems, grants, etc. They've been taken away from basically their day job, and they are doing their day job plus other jobs. So I think we can understand why on the face of this report it looks like we're not doing very well, when in fact all our members of staff have been working their socks off to get the grant monies paid out on time to the businesses and those that have justified being able to receive grants, because we've had several £1 million. I won't go down much because I don't exactly know the figures, although I'm sure Lisa does because she's well on top of everything in her department. But I think that's why the face of this report doesn't actually shed us in a very good light, when in fact we have been working very hard to achieve what we've achieved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Any other questions from members of the Audit Committee?
Can I just ask,
Yes, Councillor Benson.
was there some reason on page 32 where it says there was no policy to guide the maintenance of council property? When I read that, I thought to myself, why not? Why was there no policy? It says with reliance being placed on the knowledge and experience and personal approach.
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Doesn't seem very satisfactory, I mean.
Thank you. So within the assets team, there is a programme of planned maintenance, and that is carried out on an annual basis. I think what the audit report, and I will check with Dominic on that, was referring to was in terms of looking forward over the next few years around planned maintenance. There is an annual budget set for repairs and maintenance, which is just over £500,000. And I think what the assets team do is allocate that on an annual basis. And I think it's looking forward further into the future that the comment related to around things like car parks, public conveniences, our own buildings. We are putting money aside for things like the roof here at Fullerton House. So there are some rolling budgets where we're putting money aside for future repairs and future maintenance. But I think, chatting with Dominic, that's what the audit comment related to, which is more like a 5-year plan for maintenance.
Yeah, if I can just, put a bit more meat on the bones there. As auditors, we like to see policies, a foundation document that sets out the strategy and so forth of how an organisation is going to carry out its operations. And there was no policy that we were given and therefore we just highlighted that there needs to be some kind of foundation document that guides and steers and indicates how the council intends to carry out its building maintenance. That doesn't mean to say there was no building maintenance done, and there was reliance on the knowledge of those, experienced officers in post.
Any other questions from members of the Audit Committee? Any questions or comments from other councillors regarding the internal audit? No? We have a recommendation to add to it, and Mr. White, if you could read the recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. So, in effect, members, there's a wish for a Part 3 report recommendation. A new recommendation is reads as follows. The Audit Committee recommends the Executive to procure an extra 0.5 full-time equivalent or FTE of an internal audit resource from Devon Audit Partnership for the 2021-22 financial year to backfill the loss of internal audit staff time which have been used to administer the business grants for the Council. This will be funded from the new burdens funding received from the Government for administering the business grants. This will ensure a robust internal audit environment by enabling the Internal Audit Service to fully complete its audit plan for 2021-22.
Thank you, Mr. White. So, just to clarify to members of the committee what we're looking at here, because when you look at the internal audit situation, there is a delay on some of the checks that have been done this year, because basically the resources have been diverted into doing grant payments. What we're looking at doing is purchasing the equivalent of half a headcount from Devon Audit Partnership in order to compensate for not doing the checks that we should have done so far this year in terms of internal audit. So we're asking for assistance from Devon Audit Partnership to bring the internal audit up to date, effectively. And that is going to be funded from the new burdens funding that's been received from the government. So where is the money going to come from for the extra cost incurred? That is going to come from the new burdens funding that we received from the government. Now, if we agree to that, and the recommendation is that the Audit Committee recommends to the Executive. So we are not asking for your authority to recommend it, we're asking for your authority to recommend it to the Executive, that they would then sign off us obtaining another 0.5 headcount in order to bring the audit up to date and ensure that in 12 months' time, basically our internal audit will be completed in full. Are members of the committee clear on that, and are there any questions that you have on that? Councillor Owen.
Thank you. I would ask, is 0.5 enough to catch up?
I think probably
0.5, there's no guarantees that 0.5 will complete the plan. One thing I would say is the plan is flexible. We react to events, risks, new risks. We work with officers when we schedule our audits at a convenient time for auditors and the officers concerned. So a half a post would certainly make substantial inroads into the backlog.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. I mean, basically the 0.5 is based on the internal audit checks that have not been done this year, and then factored in the amount of hours that it would take to basically cover those, and then make sure that next year we are up to date. Yes, Councillor?
Could I say, well, it depends how many hours 0.5 contains. You know, it could be 20 hours a week, or it could be 15 hours a week, which is quite a bit of difference. It depends how many hours you contain in a week.
Yeah.
On the basis of 37 hours, full time in a week, we can do some maths and work out the number of days. At the moment, the plan is 430 days. That includes 60 days of my time. So basically, the two auditors that we have spend, if my maths is correct, 370 days between them. So if we take, doing the maths, a quarter of that would be the equivalent number of days. roughly, you know, give or take. But what we can do is obviously have discussions with the section 151 as to exactly, you know, how we'll utilise that.
Are there any other questions from, yes, Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, am I right in thinking that there's no cost to the council on this one? Direct cost?
This one.
Yes, that's correct, because it would be cost neutral, so although we would be paying additional monies to Audit Partnership, that would be funded by the money we receive from the government, the new burdens funding for administering the business grants on their behalf. So yes, the net impact on our bottom line is zero.
And the key thing there is that it would ensure we have a robust internal audit environment. So that in 12 months' time, we would be confident that we would not have any outstanding audit checks. Any other questions from members of the audit committee? Any questions from other councillors? Okay, so we have a recommendation before the audit committee. Can I have someone to move the recommendation?
Yeah, I'll move the recommendation.
Councillor Taylor moved the recommendation, seconded by Councillor Rose, seconded actually there. So the recommendation has been moved and seconded.
Parts 1 to 3. 3 parts.
Sorry.
So that would be parts 1 to 3. So the report as published has parts 1 and 2. And this is a new part 3. So it's 3 parts recommendation.
Yeah.
So we're taking the vote. All those in favour of the recommendation?
That's unanimous for those recommendations. Thank you, Jack.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to the biannual strategic risk update, Mr. Hawke. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, you're used to seeing this, but I think it looks a bit different this time, even from when you saw it last time. You'll realise that you consider this twice a year. And by its very nature, it's a document that's being updated all the time as the information changes and the risk profiles change too, or new risks are introduced. Now, this strategic risk register is not designed to capture all the risks of the council and its services, because these are contained with individual operational risk registers for each head of service, and each head of service is responsible for managing those risks. But I think you will see that there's a lot more red and yellow, if you can determine that in black and white. And we're just saying that's the famous Gordon Falls saying, wasn't it? I think that you'll actually get an idea of what COVID has done to the council's risk profile, and that we're still a long way from having come out of this. But with that, Chairman, if I may, I'll hand over to Mr. Hawke to see if he's got anything further to say.
It's all.
Nothing further to add to that. Thank you, Chairman.
Any questions regarding the risk register from members of the audit committee? Yes, Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, where we stand at the moment on non-payment of credit tax, because that's when the effect is quite heavy, I would assume.
In terms of our actual collection rate for the past financial year, 2021, we only saw a 0.4 reduction on the council tax collection rate of the previous year. So thinking back to this time last year when we were modelling scenarios whereby we could have been 5-10% down on the collection rate, I think the fact that we ended the year with only a 0.4% drop was a significant achievement, considering that same team were also administering what is now over 78 million of business grants that have been paid out.
Councillor Brazil,
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I'm sorry I was late. It was really about the leisure centres. Because what with one thing and another, that seems to sort of disappear a bit into the background, and I'm very aware that it is, in my mind, one of the biggest risks that this council is carrying at the moment. I was under the impression that we were going to dig down a bit deeper into that and the figures so that we can really make an informed decision when no doubt the next paper comes to either executive or full council. So really it was, I don't know if Mr Hall wants to elaborate on it. I mean, it's very difficult to read the small print, I have to say. But yeah, so really it was, so that's good, yeah. Thanks for that. It's not a great, it's about the same size as that, but anyway, just so can we have a sort of brief update on the position there, and can we look into it in more detail at some stage?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor President. We are actually looking at changing the format of the report so it can be read on a laptop easier. So next time that it comes around, we're hoping that we can actually get the font size bigger so you can read it on a laptop easier. But Mr Hall,
I think Mrs Buckle will take this one,
Yes.
it's layer and financial related.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Chairman. So yes, with regard to SH8, the risks there around health and wellbeing service provision, we do meet on a monthly basis with Fusion, our leisure provider. What we are looking at with Fusion at the moment is what has been the return of customers to the leisure centres since being able to reopen in the middle of April. And in the right-hand side, and sorry, yes, it is a little bit difficult to read, we have put some stats and figures about what we are seeing in terms of usage of the leisure centres. So average monthly usage for all 6 centres is running at around about approximately 35,000, whereas prior to the pandemic, this would have been between 52 and 55,000. Again, in the first month of returning, so back around April time, we had 634 memberships taken. Again, that's around about 56% of the where we were compared to February 2020. We've got the swim school performing very well. So what Fusion are doing and providing us with really is a projected income and expenditure account between now and the end of next March. I think we are coming into some critical months around the summer. This is the time when we would expect the leisure centres to have a very high usage coming into the holiday and school holiday period. So we have put a report on the executive forward plan for October. So by then we will have actual figures of what the income has been for the leisure centres over the summer period and the expenditure, because the expenditure tends to be quite constant. It's the income that really is the driver for those 6 centres. So in that October report on the forward plan for the executive, we will go into a lot of detail about what has the income been. Obviously that really depends on when all restrictions are allowed to be lifted. And again, what Fusion are doing is working with some national organisations such as Sport England and making projections about what we think may happen over the next 12 months to 24 months. Obviously, in terms of Fusion's cash flow, they've secured their C-bills loan, so that is something which has given them a high level of confidence to their position. Thank you.
thank you. Any other questions from members of the Audit Committee? Councillor Taylor.
Yes, please. Prior to COVID, they were presumably doing okay, but just okay. So was 56% of what they had then going to be enough to boost their income, boost their profits? Or?
So what we can look at in that executive October report is we can give the actual figures of what that income and expenditure would look like and go into the detail of that. So yes, it all very much depends on how many visitors and memberships they do get over the next few months. But like I say, we are coming into those key months now, those summer months. So all they can do at the moment is project what they think they will get. They're obviously doing a lot of communications with customers around, and previously we did do some videos showing the COVID secure measures in our leisure centres so that customers could see what it was going to look like before they came back to the leisure centres.
Do they know what sort of percentage they would need for break even then?
Yes, they would obviously need higher than they're getting at
Yeah.
the moment, yeah. But we can show those scenarios in detail in that next report.
Yeah, just following on from that, Chair, I mean, that's really what, in a way, what we need to see in this report, because the raw figures don't tell us whether that's a risk or a high risk or a low risk or the risk that entails. And so as such, the report that you're talking about is absolutely crucial. And let's hope that if you're expecting the big, the expectation, because we don't know what their expected numbers are, do we? And if they don't hit them, what does that mean? And those sorts of things. I'm just struggling to see from what the little bit that we have here, how we can actually fully understand the risk involved.
Yeah, I think the difficulty for all leisure providers is trying to project their future income streams, because they are dependent on things like the lifting of national restrictions, and because at the moment the capacity is limited by COVID measures, and it will, getting back to the levels, the income levels that they were at prior to the pandemic will be dependent on what happens in July, which is why in terms of reporting, October seems to be the best time to consider that, because by then we should have more knowledge around those income stream levels.
Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to add to what Mrs. Butler said, I think Councillor Brazil and Councillor Taylor are asking entirely legitimate questions. All I can say is that officers, Mrs. Buckle and Mr. Brook, are actively monitoring the situation. There's regular dialogue between us and the contractor. We appreciate that the summer is going to be a challenging period, and it's really important in terms of their business. All I would say is we're absolutely aware of that risk, Chairman, and officers are working through that. And as Mrs. Buckland said, we will bring a report back. It's on the forward plan for the executive. Clearly, if there's a need for a report ahead of that, which is currently programmed, then we will do that. But I absolutely respect the views that both Councillors Brazil and Taylor have raised. They're legitimate questions, and we're actively pursuing them. Thank you, Chairman.
And my fear is that they'll come back cap in hand and if they don't make their levels. We've supported them quite heavily over the last 18 months. And what we don't want is them to come back to us again cap in hand for another dish out, because it's just not there, is it? Sorry.
That's fine. Well, we're not anticipating that position at the moment. Remember, there was a report that went to Council in March, and that was around the money that we got from the National Lottery Fund and passporting that over to Fusion, and members agreed that. So that was to see them through the reopening period. So yes, we're not anticipating that in the future.
Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the Audit Committee or Finance?
Can I just add to that that the difference in treatment that the government has given to councils who run their own leisure centres and those who are contracted out is still a bone of contention, and the LGA is still in battle, I'd say, with the government on this very point. I don't know that we're going to get any more funding, and it doesn't look like it, but it is a continual point of grievance that everybody hasn't been treated equally in this case, and that everybody feels they should have been, because this has been one of the worst hits of COVID, has been leisure centres, which we're not obliged to run, but so many local authorities see it as an essential service which they should be running, that we all do it. So, and we feel that the government should have given equal support to everybody.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from members of the council? No? We do actually have a recommendation to be put forward to the Audit Committee. Could you read out the recommendation, Simon?
We will do, Chair. So the report as published has a recommendation to in fact review the Street Risk Register and make recommendation to Council on any further action committee should be considered. So that's the published agenda report. And Chair, at your request, we have an additional recommendation which I shall now read, which is that the Audit Committee recommends that the Executive address in their October report on the leisure services the risk that the capacity of leisure centres is significantly reduced, whilst many overheads and operating costs remain the same, and the mitigation for this risk.
And I think that recommendation really deals with what Councillor Brazil was talking about, which is that really as an audit committee we're just highlighting to the executive the concerns we have over the leisure centres, and that they address that in the October report really. And ideally I would suggest that we need at that point get some numbers on what exactly what's happening in the leisure centres by the time we get to October. So do we have someone to move that recommendation? Councillor Spencer, and anyone to second? Councillor Rose second the recommendation. All those in favour?
That's unanimous. Thank you, Chair.
There was just one recommendation, isn't there? So that's it. So moving on to the next item on the agenda is the dates of the next meeting. Just so we even have a number of dates that we would like to talk about.
I do, thank you, Chair. Now, since the draft calendar was adopted by the Council, it's become apparent that some of the dates don't tie into the accounting timetables and availability of Grant Thornton. So members would attack according to diaries being open, and we'll send the updates out after the meeting. It's been suggested that the next committee meeting, which was initially on the 29th of July, is deleted and replaced with a meeting on the 2nd of September at 2 p.m. With the then 7th of October scheduled meeting being brought forward a week to the morning of the 30th of September at 10 a.m. And then because there is then a gap of 6 months between the September and the March meetings, the inclusion of an additional committee meeting on the 9th of December at 2 p.m. Thank you.
So this is really to help accommodate with the Grant Thornton and different dates and diaries and he's moving around. Mr White will send out updates in the calendar. Obviously, as soon as we've agreed that, I suppose we need to move that as a recommendation, don't we? So do we have someone to move it as a recommendation?
Yeah.
Yeah, Councillor Taylor, and seconded. Councillor Spencer. All those in favour?
Those revisions are unanimously agreed. Thank you.
Unanimously agreed. And that concludes the meeting on agenda item number 8. And